Welcome to the Autonomic Healing Podcast. I'm Tom Pells.
And I'm Ruth Lawrenson. We'll be unpacking what it looks like to activate your brain to holistically manage stress and trauma that bring healing to the mind, body, and spirit.
Being free to live authentically as humans.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started. Tom, it's almost Christmas.
Yay!
Are you excited?
I am so excited.
I'm so excited. Christmas. I love Christmas too. Yeah. And we're doing this episode as our Christmas special. Right?
Yep.
And, you know, it's lovely Christmas. We all love, I think most people love the idea of Christmas. But one of the things that we wanted to talk about, obviously, with Christmas coming up, is that whilst it's so exciting to see all the lights and all of the movies come out and all of the presents and people get excited. Actually, we all know as human beings that underneath all of that, there's difficulty.
Yes.
People struggle in these times. And I think one of the questions that we wanted to talk about was how do we be real during Christmas time?
Yes. And there is such an idealized conceptualization of what we expect Christmas to be. Mm-hmm. And it is so idealized, it's not even possible to experience. But movies, all sorts of things are about this idealized experience. And then it's like shoving your feet into shoes that are sizes too small. And it's just very painful.
Totally. And I think even with people who, you know, maybe their lives are going swimmingly well and they execute their version of the perfect Christmas. And even in those situations, I remember a number of years ago, just having that sense of, you know, after Christmas, you have this kind of low.
Oh, yeah.
Of like, you've done all the presents, you've done it perfectly, you've had this like nice meal, whatever it is, you've watched all the movies you want to watch, you've got the house looking like you want it to look like, and yet somehow it doesn't, it's still, even if your life is going fine, somehow that still isn't the satisfaction that everyone hopes for, because actually it's an illusion, really, that whole thing.
Yep. And that is ironic because the whole point of Christmas wasn't that at all.
No.
It was about love and experiencing being present together turned into presents.
Yes.
That are being shared out.
Yeah.
And being present can be painful.
That's so true.
Because it raises so much. And I think the reason for the idealism is because in some ways it can be an escape from things. Or it can be a present. And we can be present, so to speak.
Yeah.
And what we're going to be talking about is a present that I got as a very young boy. I was probably about 3 or so. And it was a Velveteen Rabbit. And it was in my stocking just the same way that it was in the story, The Velveteen Rabbit, by The Velveteen Rabbit, or How Toys Become Real by Margery Williams, which was a British story many, many years ago, but it made its way across the Atlantic, and I was one of those boys who got a Velveteen Rabbit, and I still have that to this day, and it is just like that Velveteen Rabbit, who went from being this pristine, lovely toy in a stocking to a very well-loved and a bit dilapidated toy.
Yes. Yeah.
Like us. We may start off all shiny and new, and then we get a bit dilapidated by the stresses and traumas of life. And how that isn't necessarily a negative, but a real Christmas present.
So we're going to read a little bit of the Velveteen Rabbit, and I'm super looking forward to this. And listeners, Tom does have his Velveteen Rabbit. I've seen it. We're going to show you a photo of it. It's a lovely part of your childhood. But some really strong themes here in this story of the Velveteen Rabbit that really apply to us as human beings today.
Because this isn't about a Velveteen Rabbit. It's about human beings. And how do we become real? Not how toys become real, but how human beings can become real.
Especially in this Christmas season.
Especially.
Do you want me to start?
Please do. This was written by a Brit, so it should be read out.
I will do so. Okay, here we go. There was once a Velveteen Rabbit, and in the beginning he was really splendid. He was fat and bunchy as a rabbit should be. His coat was spotted brown and white. He had real thread whiskers, and his ears were lined with pink satin. On Christmas morning, when he was sat wedged in the top of the boy's stocking with a sprig of holly between his paws, the effect was charming. There were other things in this stocking, nuts and oranges and a toy engine and chocolate almonds and a clockwork mouse, but the rabbit was quite the best of all. For at least 2 hours the boy loved him, and then aunts and uncles came to dinner, and there was great rustling of tissue paper and unwrapping of parcels, and in the excitement of looking at all the new presents, the Velveteen Rabbit was forgotten. For a long time he lived in the toy cupboard on the nursery floor, and no one thought very much about him. He was naturally shy, and being only made of velveteen, some of the more expensive toys quite snubbed him. The mechanical toys were very superior and looked down upon everyone else. They were full of modern ideas and pretended they were real. The model boat, who had lived through 2 seasons and lost most of his paint, caught the tone from them and never missed an opportunity of referring to his rigging in technical terms. The rabbit could not claim to be a model of anything, for he didn't know that real rabbits existed. He thought that they were all stuffed with sawdust, just like himself, and he understood that sawdust was quite out of date and should never be mentioned in modern circles. Even Timothy, the jointed wooden lion, who was made by the disabled soldiers and should have been had broader views, put on airs and pretended he was connected with government. Between them all, the poor little rabbit was made to feel himself very insignificant and commonplace, and the only person who was kind to him at all was the skin horse. The skin horse had lived longer in the nursery than any of the others. He was so old that his brown coat was bald in patches and showed the seams underneath, and most of the hairs in his tail had been pulled out to string bead necklaces. He was wise, for he had seen a long succession of mechanical toys arrive to boast and swagger, and by break their mainsprings and pass away, and he knew that there were only toys and would never turn into anything else. For nursery magic is very strange and wonderful, and only those playthings that are old and wise and experienced like the skin horse understand all about it. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day, when they were lying side by side near the nursery fender before Nana came to tidy the room. "Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and stick out handle?" "Real isn't how you are made," said the skin horse. "It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" he asked, "or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily or who have sharp edges or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off and your eyes drop out and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly except to people who don't understand. I suppose you are real, said the rabbit. And then he wished he had not said it, for he thought the skin horse might be sensitive. But the skin horse only smiled. The boy's uncle made me real, he said. That was a great many years ago. But once you are real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts for always.
Yes, I'm crying. Because that's what my Velveteen Rabbit looks like. A bit shabby. And I love the way this said. It doesn't happen all at once. You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or have sharp edges, or have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, or your eyes drop out, and my Velveteen Rabbit has only one eye, and get loose in the joints, and very shabby, and yes, my Velveteen Rabbit is very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand.
It's a beautiful story, Tom, which just, says so much about the human condition, which is the episode we started season 1 on, the tsunami of stress, the human condition, and how, so many of us long to be loved, and yet the journey of becoming real, being loved, is often so very painful and fraught with trauma and stress.
Yes.
And yet through it, as we embrace it, and we've talked about pain in past episodes as well, and how, there is beneficial pain.
And because no pain
productive
is
pain.
Not an option.
Yes.
But we can choose the productive pain.
And through that, we become real.
Mm-hmm. The boy got sick, and the bunny got the sickness on him. And so the bunny was put in a sack and set aside because he was destined to be burned. And then some magic happened.
Mm.
You must have your old bunny, Nana said. Fancy all that fuss for a toy, because the boy wanted his bunny. The boy sat up in bed and stretched out his hands. Give me my bunny, he said. You mustn't say that. He isn't a toy. He's real. When the little rabbit heard that, he was happy, for he knew that what the skin horse had said was true at last. The nursery magic had happened to him, and he was a toy no longer. He was real. The boy himself had said it. And sometimes, for us, it's important for us to have someone affirm that we are real.
Yeah.
And we're not just a toy, someone or something to be played with, or something to be propped up and made to look good, but real, and have that affirmed, and never ugly, but beautiful, except to people who can't appreciate it. That night he was almost too happy to sleep, and so much love stirred at his little sawdust heart that it almost burst, and into his boot-button eyes that had long ago lost their polish there came a look of wisdom and beauty, so that even Nana noticed it next morning when she picked him up and said, I declare if that old bunny hasn't got quite a knowing expression. And that was a wonderful summer. But as I said, the boy got ill. And in the illness, it was a disease. And he had held that bunny through his long illness. And as he began to come out of it, the bunny was thought to be diseased and put in a sack to be taken out to the garden to be burned. And oftentimes, as we share the trials and struggles with others, we can take on some of that. But we're real, and we can be real, even as we experience all that with others. And we've all had that experience, and it is all very real. It was a long, weary time, for the boy was too ill to play, and the little rabbit found it rather dull with nothing to do all day long. But he snuggled down patiently and looked forward to the time when the boy should be well again, and they would go out in the garden amongst the flowers and the butterflies and play splendid games in the raspberry thicket, like they used to. All sorts of delightful things he planned, and while the boy lay half asleep, he crept up close to the pillow and whispered them in his ear. And presently the fever turned, and the boy got better. He was able to sit up in bed and look at picture books, while the little rabbit cuddled close at his side. And one day, they let him get up and dress. And there was going to be a seaside journey and a little trip. And the boy was very excited. Hurrah, thought the little bunny. Tomorrow we shall go to the seaside. For the boy had often talked of the seaside, and he wanted so very much to see the big waves coming in and the tiny crabs and the sandcastles. Just then, Nana caught sight of him. How about his old bunny, she asked. That? Said the doctor. Why, it's a mass of scarlet fever germs. Burn it at once. What? Nonsense. Get him a new one. He mustn't have that anymore. And so the little rabbit was put into a sack with the old picture books and a lot of rubbish and carried out to the end of the garden behind the fowl house. That was a fine place to make a bonfire, only the gardener was too busy just then to attend to it. He had the potatoes to dig and the green peas to gather, but next morning he promised to come quite early and burn the lot. And sometimes it can seem like life is like that.
I think that's such a strong picture, Tom, of the relational dynamics that can happen, especially as we're talking about Christmas, you know. People who've been close, people who've journeyed with another person through hardship or sickness, and then something happens where there's rejection, or you're forgotten about, or, you know, you're ghosted by friends.
You feel discarded.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that happens a lot during normal life. But I think these things that get highlighted in this season.
Yep.
That feeling of being discarded.
And while the boy was asleep, dreaming of the seaside, the little rabbit lay among the old picture books in the corner behind the fowl house, and he felt very lonely. The sack had been left untied, and so by wriggling a bit, he was able to get his head through the opening and look out. He was shivering a little, for he had always been used to sleeping in a proper bed, and by this time his coat had worn so thin and threadbare from hugging, there was no longer any protection to him. Nearby, he could see the thicket of raspberry canes growing tall and close like a tropical jungle, in whose shadow he had played with a boy on bygone mornings. He thought of those long sunlit hours in the garden, how happy they were, and a great sadness came over him. He seemed to see them all pass before him, each more beautiful than the other. The fairy huts in the flower bed, The quiet evenings in the wood when he lay in the bracken and the little ants ran over his paws. The wonderful day when he first knew that he was real. He thought of the skin horse, so wise and gentle, and all that he had told him. Of what use was it to be loved and lose one's beauty and become real if it all ended like this? And a real tear, trickled down his shabby velvet nose and fell to the ground. And then a strange thing happened. For where the tear had fallen, a flower grew out of the ground. A mysterious flower, not at all like any that grew in the garden. It had slender green leaves the color of emeralds, and in the center of the leaves a blossom like a golden cup. It was so beautiful that the little rabbit forgot to cry and just lay there watching it. And presently the blossom opened, and out of it there stepped a fairy. She was quite the loveliest fairy in the whole world. Her dress was of pearl and dewdrops, and there were flowers round her neck and in her hair, and her face was like the most perfect flower of all. And she came close to the little rabbit and gathered him up in her arms and kissed him on his velveteen nose that was all damp from crying. "Little rabbit," she said, "don't you know who I am?" The little rabbit looked up at her, and it seemed to him that he had seen her face before, but he couldn't think where. "I am the nursery magic fairy," she said. "I take care of all the playthings that the children have loved. When they are old and worn out, and the children don't need them anymore, then I come and take them away with me and turn them into real." "Wasn't I real before?" asked the little rabbit. "You were real to the boy because he loved you. Now you shall be real to everyone." And she held the little rabbit close in her arms and flew with him into the wood. And there can be a nursery magic, but we're talking about human beings. And this is really about how we become real. And we can be real because we're loved. And then there is real. When we are loved by ourselves and we know ourselves to be real. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a beautiful story. I don't know whether anyone's heard this before. I've heard of the Velveteen Rabbit, but I haven't read it before. So it's just a beautiful story with such strong themes like we've talked about already, about this plight of humanity to become real. And we become real by being loved and loving ourselves.
Yes. And there is a real that comes from others loving us and embracing that and having our fur rubbed off.
By lots of hugs.
Because we can't, no matter how shabby we become, we can never be ugly when we have been loved. But there's another real that happens when we learn to love ourselves. She held the little rabbit close in her arms and flew with him into the wood. It was light now, for the moon had risen. All the forest was beautiful, and the fronds of the bracken shone like frosted silver. In the open glade between the tree trunks, the wild rabbits danced with their shadows on the velvet grass. But when they saw the fairy, they all stopped dancing and stood round in a ring to stare at her. "I've brought you a new playfellow," the fairy said. "You must be very kind to him and teach him all he needs to know in Rabbitland, for he is going to live with you forever and ever." And she kissed the little rabbit again and put him down on the grass. "Run and play, little rabbit," she said. But the little rabbit sat quite still for a moment and never moved. For when he saw all the wild rabbits dancing around him, he suddenly remembered about his hind legs, and he didn't want them to see that he was made all in one piece. He did not know that when the fairy kissed him that last time, she had changed him altogether. And he might have sat there a long time, too shy to move, if just then something hadn't tickled his nose. And before he thought what he was doing, he lifted his hind toe to scratch it. And he found that he actually had hind legs. Instead of dingy velveteen, he had brown fur, soft and shiny. His ears twitched by themselves, and his whiskers were so long that they brushed the grass. He gave one leap, and the joy of using those hind legs was so great that he went springing about the turf on them, jumping sideways and whirling around as the others did. And he grew so excited that when at last he had stopped to look, the fairy had gone. He was a real rabbit at last, at home with the other rabbits. And that is what can happen to us. We don't have to just live as presents to be unwrapped. Or even people to be loved. We can become real by learning to love ourselves. And then, when Christmas happens, we can be present and not simply a present.
I love that, Tom. Thank you for sharing such a beautiful story and a lovely part of your childhood, and a message really of hope and healing, I think, for our listeners as they're entering the Christmas season. Let's be not just a present, but let's be present with ourselves, others, and in a way where we can be authentic, where we can love from that authentic space, you know?
Yes. This isn't about how toys become real. It's about how humans become real. And let me finish with this.
Okay.
Autumn passed, and winter, and in the spring when the days grew warm and sunny, the boy went out to play in the wood behind the house. And while he was playing, 2 rabbits crept out from the bracken and peeped at him. One of them was brown all over, but the other had strange markings under his fur, as though long ago he had been spotted. And the spots still showed through. And about his little soft nose and his round black eyes, there was something familiar. So that the boy thought to himself, why, he looks just like my old bunny that was lost when I had scarlet fever. But he never knew that it really was his own bunny, come back to look at the child who had first helped him to be real. Christmas is about children and presents and toys. And when we grow, I think there's a part of us that longs for that again. But there's something far better, even if that could be recaptured. And that's to be who we are as adults and real.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom. Well, we just want to wish you all a very Merry
Christmas.
Merry Christmas. And we can't wait to come back together for our next episode.
You've been listening to the Autonomic Healing Podcast.
Join us next time as we continue in our conversations with Tom. If you're interested in pursuing your own autonomic healing journey and want to find a practitioner, visit our website innerworkings.org. See you at the next episode.